project is set within the Department of International Relations. And just briefly, I'm not an IR student. I did my BA in IR, but given my experience, that really informs my reason for wanting to do this research. The marginality and the hierarchies that I witnessed there, and just the broader social movement we're seeing now for decolonizing, along with movements for Black Lives Matter and Roads Must Fall. So I really situated my project early on with the race equity framework and the inclusive education action plan, while also recognizing that the department I'm working with is one of the oldest and largest, and it's one that's always ranked highly, but it is deeply embedded in a colonial past and present, along with the rest of the university. So to begin to acknowledge and unpack this, I start by looking at the core reading list, two of them. I did a survey questionnaire with students. I had some interviews with scholars outside of LSE who are working on decolonizing, and I actually did some archival research on the history of the Department of IR and some of the courses that it offered on colonial administration. So to begin with, like the other students have said, it's clear that decolonization and diversification are not the same thing, especially with IR, where narratives establish Europe quickly as the main actor, and any outside body is the periphery. So that kind of mentality frames a lot of the structures that we're seeing within classroom settings and education, and what voices we're hearing from. So students from BAME backgrounds, LGBTQ backgrounds are not met with voices and plurality that they should be given their backgrounds. So decolonizing is understanding that IR is imperial relations. It's a living, breathing field. It's not just an academic institution or field of knowledge. It's something that students live and experience. So we have to look within and beyond reading lists at how universities have been used as an extension of empire and power, and how these continue to dominate the landscape today. So like I said, I looked at two core classes in the IR department, and in both of them, I found that most authors are based in North America and Europe, critical perspectives relating to post-colonialism, colonialism itself, even feminism are left for later weeks. So that kind of exclusion also communicates that the priority lies on the development of the West, of Europe, as opposed to the marginality of outside regions. And even when topics shift to these regions, I found that they're approached with a Western lens. So one of these courses, 1 week, the topic was, could the international community have saved Syria? So that really frames the way that we're seeing Eurocentric attitudes dominate the department and the university at large. So I'm really interested in thinking about how we can substitute articles and textbooks with videos, films, other forms of knowledge, especially since we know these articles are coming from the North, from the West. And also, how can we incorporate critical theories throughout the course, not just leaving them at the very end of the course? My survey also, it really resonated with the literature, and that most students said that they have heard of decolonizing, but their curriculum only sometimes actually engages with this conversation. And most of them said they haven't learned about the history of the LSE at all. I had a Padlet, which I'm going to open briefly. If any later on look at it, it's a really good way of visualizing some student responses, but these are just some of the main ones that I thought would be important to highlight. Students are saying it's not just an arbitrary supplementation of non-Western scholars. There has to be more done, and they want to be involved in co-creating the learning environment. So that's just something I thought was useful to have go along with my presentation. I also interviewed some scholars at Oxford Brookes who are doing decolonizing work, and they also mentioned that we need to rethink the way that we begin approaching IR and the very first course and the very first lecture, and that's something that I want to encourage in my recommendations. And lastly, I did some archival research speaking to students who have found that the Department of IR, which was established in 1927, actually had courses on colonial administration. Specifically, there's one course, Cultural Contacts Between the West and Primitive Peoples, where you can see this language, they deconstruct like native social organization. In 1930, 1931, there was a class that talked about advanced and backward civilizations. And while some might dismiss this information as just part of that era, I think this needs to be addressed and confronted directly by the department, which is why in my recommends I'll encourage having the department come to terms with this and acknowledge it and teach its students about where it even comes from, along with the field of knowledge. So my findings, I'm going really fast, but my findings find that the Department of IR is a global force, and it reproduces colonial mixtures of power through its reading lists, through the racial ethnographic composition of the department, which I didn't get into, Students clearly view decolonization as something that's urgent, but not something that's being reflected in the curriculum. And they want to be involved in collaborating with lecturers and shaping the learning environment. So the Padlet that I showed earlier has some ideas of what students think would be useful to do, but there's much more that needs to be done. So I would hope the department reaches out to students and works with them. And then also one of my biggest takeaways is the department must look at its colonial past and present, and it can't just add authors of color, women of color to the reading list without confronting its role in colonial administration. So these are my recommendations: reviewing course reading lists, which I've begun to do, and restructuring them, contextualizing academic material to real world oppression. So again, viewing IR as imperial relations, collaborating with students to develop a curriculum that acknowledges the department's colonial history, and then continuing to do that research about the history of the LSE. And then working with students and movements in the university, I reached out to students who had done that archival research, but also looking at movements like Justice for Cleaners that are deeply, like IR really shows itself through in those movements, but it's not broached in the academic setting. And that's something that I think is a loss. So in conclusion, I've opened some doors and I've just started tapping them, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. And I'm just thankful that I had the opportunity to begin this work. And I hope that it continues in many ways in the future. Thank you so much.